Okay. So welcome everyone. We have so many that are back on this webcast series of webinars that we are doing. So we're so thankful for your commitment to professional development, and more importantly, your commitment to economic progress and development in the American South, which we always love to say is the world's third largest economy because of you and our great partners. So I'm really thrilled to get out of the way here and sit back and learn with you on this one. We have a property enrichment, how to stage your how to stage your major sites for development. So, we all know this, but giving consultants quick or enterprise quick and risk-free site selection experiences is critical to our ability to win, and speed to market is one of the major advantages in the South and is why we lead globally. And I think what's really great about that is we are consistently moving the needle and leveraging the best methods and future-focused strategies and technologies to really enhance and perpetuate our competitive advantage relative to property development, product development, speed to market. So with that said, I'm really happy today to welcome one of our closest friends, our signature partner, GIS WebTech, and Mr. Ron Bertasi to lead us in a really important discussion. We also have the great Michael Cleary and Kathy Becker from GIS WebTech are with us as well. So I will introduce Ron and then let him facilitate. But Ron really needs no introduction with SEDC. But if you are new to us or you are watching this on YouTube or on our website, I want to read his bio really quick, and then we'll turn the floor over to him. So Ron joined GIS WebTech in 2016 and has helped the company become the GIS technology leader in the economic development market. GIS WebTech is the fastest growing provider of technology to the economic development sector with a compound annual growth rate of 119% over the last 5 years. Ron has served in the CEO role since 2001, primarily in energy and technology businesses ranging from startups to 300 million divisions of Fortune 150 companies. During this period, Ron simultaneously worked as an operating partner with 2 private equity firms and has served on 17 company boards as both a company CEO and as an independent director. Ron has worked as a management consultant in the earlier parts of his career. He holds an MBA from Dartmouth, an MS from UCLA, and a BA from Colgate, and was a summer student fellow at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He and his wife had 3 grown children. So before we turn it over to Ron, a little bit of housekeeping here. So we're going to dig into a lot of weeds here. So questions may arise throughout the presentation here. So if you have a burning question, pop it in the chat, please. Now they may get to it, the next couple of slides or whatever. But also at the end of this, we're going to have some time with Ron, Michael, and Kathy. So turn your cameras on and let's just have a discussion. Also, the team is totally fine if you need to turn your camera on and ask a question during our experience here. So this is meant to just be a really good discussion with the world's best economic developers here. So let's have at it here. And Ron, thank you. Thank you for all that you do for SEDC and more importantly, the South. We're so thrilled to work closely with you, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Matt. I just know somebody said go Raiders. One of my friends works at scoreboard at Colgate. Carl Heck. Hey, that's excellent. And it's not often you meet somebody who has any connection to Colgate. It's such a small school. Thanks for joining us, everyone. First thing I want to say is, Matt, I really need to get you a shorter bio. That's embarrassing and too long. So I will do that for the next one. But we got a small group today, so we'd really love to keep this very casual. As Matt said, please feel free to chime in at any time with a question. We'll keep an eye on the chat box. Feel free to use the raise your hand feature, whatever you're comfortable with, and we'll just have a discussion as we go. So that's the spirit of today's meeting. We're also confident we're going to give you some of your day back. In other words, I don't think we're going to take an hour to cover all this. We will leave time for Q&A at the end, but again, I don't think we'll need the full hour. So I'm going to go ahead and share screens, and as we go through the discussion today, Michael will be chiming in, Kathy will be chiming in, and I'll switch back and forth between some PowerPoint slides on the screen and some web tabs on the screen as well, browser tabs on the screen as well. So bear with me for a second as I set that up. Okay, you should see my screen now. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who are not familiar with us, I want to do a quick introduction to us and our company. Now, I promise this discussion today is not going to be a sales pitch. We want to get you some information that's helpful for you, some educational information on how technology is leading the charge in these areas today is not meant to be a sales pitch. However, I am going to shamelessly show you two slides about our company at the beginning here. The first one talks about us as the technology leader in economic development. We're the only certified Esri partner in the space. This is the only technology, our technology is the only technology built natively on the Esri platform. And in our short history, the company's been around about 6 years. We have an unmatched record of innovation. I won't go through them, but what you see on the slide here are an example, a set of examples of features that we were the first to develop in online site selection technology. And our applications are the latest available. We're now serving clients across North America and now in Europe as well. This last shameless self-promotion slide shows our growth from year-end 2017 through year-end 2023. You can see that chart hovering in the air over downtown Atlanta. So we've grown from a handful of customers at the end of 2017, shortly after we launched our first app, to hundreds today, as I mentioned, across North America and now into Europe as well. Okay, enough about us. Let's jump into the topic today. So we're going to talk about property enrichment. Well, what exactly is property enrichment? This is a quick definition that we find useful in talking to clients and to economic developers about this. Property enrichment is essentially providing a complete use case for a property. Now, what does a use case mean for a property? It means an example of how the property can be used that is designed to fit a target industry. It also showcases the property's best assets. So it's designed to meet the needs of a target industry. It's designed to show the property's best assets. And importantly, it generally is going to include a 3D virtual building. Now, there are examples where property enrichment does not include 3D buildings, but for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to focus on the use of 3D buildings. And then lastly, and perhaps most important of all, with the advances in technology now, you should be able to provide this kind of detailed use case targeted at one of the industries you're going after for recruitment, showcasing the property's best assets and including 3D buildings, virtual buildings, with one click. We want to make this as simple as possible for site selectors. So one-click access of a fully staged use case, that is property enrichment. Okay, so let's dig into each of those components of the definition. The first one is the design for targeted industries. So the use case is designed for a specific targeted industry or set of industries. Why do we do this? Well, or why do best practices include this? Why do leading economic developers do this? Well, the idea is obvious, I think. You want to show your targeted industries that you understand their needs. By doing so, you indicate to them very clearly that you're serious about recruiting them. You know what they're looking for. They can save time by working with you and looking at your targeted industries as opposed to doing a broader scan. You're getting them focused on your community right from the get-go by focusing them on the sites that make the most sense for their industry and therefore making their work more efficient. So I think it's become standard practice in economic development for quite a while now for economic developers to identify target industries and document their needs. Most economic developers are doing this. They've got a set of target industries that they're really focused on. And to a large degree, it's also standard practice now to analyze your properties to find the best matches for those target industries. Lots of economic developers are doing this. Where economic developers tend to fall off the page, though, is they don't necessarily take the next steps to make this all very, very easy for economic developers, for site selectors, and very obvious for site selectors. What does that mean? Well, that means ensuring that these properties that are matched to your target industries stand out in your online site selection technology. In other words, if you've got dozens or hundreds or even thousands of properties in your online site selection technology, you do not want these properties that fit best with your target industries to get lost in that huge number of properties. You want to make them stand out, be immediately available, immediately obvious to those target industry site selectors who come to your website. But importantly, you want to use the functions of property enrichment that we're talking about today to ensure that site selectors who click on these properties see the full use case for their industry. Now, I use the word ensure Very specifically, what we mean by that is you have certainty. In other words, one click and the user, the site selector, sees the full use case you want them to see. So you have certainty, the technology provides it, and that site selector is going to see the full use case you want them to see, targeted at their specific industry. Michael, can you do me a favor? I don't have, because I'm sharing screens, it's not obvious to me if people are asking questions. Would you please jump in if we see any questions and have any discussion we need to have?
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so let's take a look at a specific example, manufacturing. Very, very common target industry in economic development, as you all know. So let's take a look at how a specific use case may have requirements. The first might be freeway access. So you've got a manufacturer, many of them are going to transport their finished products by truck. They're going to prefer to be close to freeway entrance and exit ramps. So you should be able to use GIS technology to find the properties within your property data set that are within a designated distance from a freeway entrance and exit ramp. 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever makes the most sense for that particular industry. This is standard now. You should be able to do this. Similarly, if this manufacturer requires high voltage power, which is pretty common in manufacturing, they're going to want three-phase power in many cases. You can use GIS functionality very easily to find properties within your property data set that have ready access to high voltage power. It's a lot faster and a lot cheaper for those manufacturers to move into sites that already have three-phase power, high voltage power readily available than it is to have to connect to a transmission line at some distance. That's expensive, and it takes a long time for the power companies to be able to do that. And then the third component of our example here is workforce. So our manufacturer is looking for a skilled workforce. Well, again, you can use GIS functionality. It's very straightforward to do so to ensure that a sufficient workforce is available within a reasonable commute time. And you can use these features to identify those properties that best match the needs of the manufacturers you are targeting. Okay, so what do we mean by showcasing the property's best assets? Well, this is all about making your property stand out. There are, as you know, many economic developers with overlapping target industries. Manufacturing, we just talked about, is an obvious example. Many economic developers across the country are targeting manufacturing as one of the industries they want to recruit. So what that means is in this competitive market, this competitive world of economic development, one of the ways you can improve your effectiveness and improve the odds of recruiting the businesses you're targeting is by making your property stand out. So as we talked about a minute ago, identify each property's best assets, understand what those property strengths are, add them to the use case for your targeted industry when you stage or enrich the property, but only do so if they're relevant. In other words, you may have a property that you think makes a ton of sense for manufacturing, following the example we've been talking about. And you've looked at the features we just mentioned a few minutes ago, workforce, three-phase power, access to freeways, all of those things, and thinking about how to select the best properties that fit the manufacturers that you're trying to recruit. But imagine you've got one of those properties that's got this neat asset, a neat strength of the property that, it kind of doesn't really have anything to do with manufacturing, but you think is pretty interesting. Well, our advice, based on the best practices we're seeing working with clients and with leading economic developers and site selectors, is not to include it. Now, that may be a little counterintuitive. You may think, well, if this is a neat feature, it's unique. I think it's interesting. I want to add it to the site. I want to add it to the enrichment of the property so that when a user or site selector clicks on the property, they see all of the assets, including this neat feature. Our advice would be don't include it. Why? Because you want to stay focused on the things that matter to your target audience. And your target audience, in this case, is a site selector working for a manufacturer. If you add to the enrichment assets that aren't relevant for that decision of where to locate a manufacturing facility, you're simply confusing the issue. And you're taking the site selector's eye off the things you want him to focus on that stand out, that make that property attractive for him or her. Now, lastly, keep in mind, you're going to have properties that have very strong properties that have multiple interesting use cases. Maybe they're really excellent for manufacturing, but they can also serve very well for distribution or some other commercial or industrial use. What we recommend and what clients are doing in many cases now is to list those properties multiple times. Make them stand out for each of those target industries. Maybe one is manufacturing, maybe one is distribution. Stage the property separately, showcasing the assets that are relevant for each of those two use cases, and list it in your site selection technology twice. So rather than trying to showcase multiple use cases in one view of the property, which is going to be difficult and confusing for the site selectors who look at that view, instead, our recommendation is to list the property multiple times, 2, 3, 4 times, if there are 2, 3, or 4 separate use cases focused on different industries. And again, be very clear on the target industry for each use case so there is no confusion when users see that property listed multiple times. Okay, the third component is including 3D virtual buildings. Now, this is kind of interesting because the technology to showcase 3D buildings existed long before COVID. But COVID accelerated what had been a slow adoption of 3D virtual site visits. And post-COVID now, we're seeing 3D site visits essentially as a standard part of the process. So businesses and site selectors are going to look at things remotely, and they're going to do that as a standard part of the process pretty much every time. Now, what this means is with the advancement of technology and the use of virtual site visits by site selectors, you have the ability now to eliminate imagination as a requirement for understanding a property use case. Before the widespread adoption of 3D buildings and virtual site visits, there was a lot of talk, some overhead photos, aerial photos, and so on, maybe some drone video of properties, but not a lot of direct display of what the property could look like in particular use cases. That's now changed. And as I mentioned, these virtual site visits are essentially a standard part of the process. So in our view, 3D buildings, virtual buildings are a must for bringing these use cases to life. They really drive home in a very visual and impactful way how the property can be utilized for your target industry. Now, one quick reminder here as you're thinking about staging your properties, be sure to include the 3D building that best matches the use case for your target industry, as well as the site dimensions and other features of the site. So what does that mean? Well, common sense. Don't try and cram a very big building into a very small site and leave no margin around the building. Obviously, that might not fly with zoning, other site restrictions like infrastructure. So keep all of those things in mind as you stage your properties and include 3D buildings. And let's talk about one-click access. We've mentioned this. This is, if you leave here today remembering only one thing about this webinar, this is what I'd like you to remember. The days where you're going to ask a site selector to come to your site selection technology, find their way to properties, then find their way to interesting assets and interesting features of their property by navigating on a trial and error basis through multiple menus, those days are over. Technology now has advanced to the point where you can easily provide one-click access, showcasing this use case for your targeted industry. You don't need to ask site selectors to figure it all out on their own. So what does that mean, one-click access? That means from the listings where they see the summary thumbnails of the properties, without even knowing that you've got the property staged, the site selector does what people are going to do. He or she clicks on the property. That's what people do. When they see a thumbnail, they want to learn more, they click on the property. When the site selector does that, technology now enables you to have a fully staged view of the property, showcasing the use case in its entirety, targeted at that industry, eliminating the need for the site selector to figure out anything on their own. One click, they see what you want them to see, showcasing that use case and fitting their needs based on their industry. So in other words, your site selection app should take it from there. One click, site selection app should show them what you want them to see. Turn on 3D for them so that they don't have to know how to do that. Show them the full use case, and then provide instant access to the details of the use case by clicking on things on the screen, which again is obvious and what people try to do today. So your technology should enable you to provide these use cases and eliminate the need for the site selector to do anything other than click on the thumbnail. A perfectly obvious thing to do. Okay, so continuing the point, really want to stress this, as I mentioned, if you leave here today, remember only one thing, this is it. Provide one-click access. Take away the guesswork, take away the need to find your way through navigation of multiple menus. And continuing the discussion, here's a couple of don'ts. As we just talked about some things to do, here's some things not to do. Don't ask a site selector to draw a 3D building. They're not going to take the time to do it. They're busy people. They're not going to take the time to learn how to use tools or widgets to draw 3D buildings. They're not in the architecture and engineering world. They're site selectors. So instead, you should provide that for them. Okay. Second thing is don't ask them to figure out how to turn on and off 3D. Although it's pretty easy in most modern technologies, take even that simple, easy step away from them to provide one-click access. The more you ask them to do, the less likely they are to follow through multiple steps to get to the information you want them to see for the property. And then, as I mentioned a couple times now, don't ask them to figure it all out on their own and find that property's best assets by navigating through multiple menus, layers menus, demographics menus, workforce menus, infrastructure information. All that should be available with one click on the thumbnail such that they see all of that information that you want them to see. Okay, so now let's turn to some very specific examples of property enrichment. We're going to look at 5 examples. The first is going to be a general industrial use case. So this is a property that has rail and high voltage power available. The second will be an industrial park, and we're going to show available land with surrounding industrial buildings in this example. The third will also be an industrial park, but in this case, we're going to show multiple 3D buildings highlighting the options and flexibility across this industrial park. The fourth example is going to be a very targeted example, an airport development, showing airside properties that are available at this local airport. And then the fifth is going to be a retail example. All of the discussion we've had so far has really focused on industrial distribution, similar types of properties, but all of this logic applies to commercial, retail, office, and what as well. So we'll show a retail example. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a minute. I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and I'm going to go to my browser. So give me 1 second to do that. And if we have any questions, Michael, please just chime in and let me know. Okay, so you should see my browser on your screen. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so for our first example, we're going to take a look at that industrial site that I mentioned a minute ago. Now here we are, we're looking at a site selection technology. We click on the property. You can see that this first property looks kind of interesting, 200 Saratoga Drive. I can see it's 1.2 miles from the nearest interstate exit, and I can see that it's 49 miles from the nearest international airport. So as I mentioned, a site selector or a business who comes to this site and wants to learn more, sees the thumbnail, what are they going to do if they're curious about it or want to investigate this property further? They're going to click on the thumbnail. So that's what I'll do. I'll click on the thumbnail, and I'll take a look at what happens. Of course, I get the details for the property on the left side of the screen. And I can see contact information, and as I scroll down, I can see other additional information. But let's take a look at what's happened on the map. The software automatically opened that 3D virtual building and turned on 3D. So I can see the use case for the property specifically. So in this case, I see a 100,000 square foot light industrial building. And I can see from the legend more information about that building. Now I'm going to hit the back button. And I'm doing that because I want to show that whether moving forward by clicking on mail or backward by hitting the back button, the site selector does not have to know how to turn on or turn off 3D. Software turned it on for him and showed him that 3D building and turned it off for him when he hit the back button and he's back to his starting point. So let's take a look at another example here. I'm going to come to the Covington Logistics Park. Again, I can see basic information in the thumbnail. I'm a site selector. I want to look at this property in more detail. I click on it. And again, the software opens the property, opens a satellite image, showcases the property in 3D, and shows a virtual site visit. Now you'll notice in this case, I can see that virtual building on the property. This is a 500,000 square foot distribution center, and I can see that when I click on the building. But take a look at the legend. The legend makes it clear that there's a rail access and electric transmission available as well. And I can see the rail access in yellow right along the property. I click on that, I can see that CSX rail. And similarly, we have high voltage power readily available as well, right on site. 115 kilovolt overhead line owned by Georgia Power. So in this case, the economic developer has staged this property such that when a user clicks on the property, the software opens 3D, showcases this industrial building, and shows that both rail access and high voltage power are already available on site, highlighting this property's real strengths. And of course, the economic developer can showcase this type of view in a 3D virtual meeting, virtual site visit, showing the details in that meeting.
Ron, this is Kathy.
Yes.
We've got a question from Steve Kelly about what tools do you use for the 3D building drawings?
Great question. So this is where we believe, and we believe this very strongly, that you should not ask a site selector to draw buildings, you should provide them. So in our case, with our technology, we provide 26 3D buildings for free, included in the app. These range from small retail buildings to large industrial buildings, commercial, distribution, really every type of building in economic development is included in that set. We've even got, believe it or not, some greenhouse buildings because a client asked us to produce them. So we said, sure. So with these 26 buildings, you simply decide which building makes sense for the property, drop a pin where you want it, and the building is then visible on the property anytime a user clicks on it. It's so simple to do, it takes about 2 seconds. What a lot of clients do is they experiment. They look at the property, they try dropping different types of buildings on it that are consistent with the target industries they're going after. Now you can change the building size a little bit. You can move the building around, rotate it, lift it up and down to reflect topography and so on. It's very, very easy to do. Michael, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, it is designed to be intuitive and user friendly. There are a number of skilled users across the network. And so we have it at a very basic level. So it's intuitive. You can go in and point and click, drag and drop. You know, you don't have to be an expert or go through any certified GIS training to do this. We've tested it without training users to figure it out, and they've done it quite easily, which indicated to us that it is super user-friendly and intuitive.
Yeah, and again, the point of today's discussion is not really for us to make a sales pitch to you. We're, of course, using the words we and our technology and so on, because that's what we're most familiar with. 3D buildings are now becoming really common, and these use cases are becoming really common, but we do feel very strongly that you should provide the building one-click access to that fully staged use case rather than asking others to draw it. We just don't think they're going to, frankly, from discussions we've had with site selectors, they told us they're not going to take the time to do that. Okay, any other questions while we're paused?
There was another question on this from Carl Heck. Thank you, Carl. What should an EDA budget to get the site ready for a site plan like this?
Really good question. Well, here's the good news. With modern GIS technology, this is all included. In other words, you know, this is not something that you should be paying extra for. It should be included in your site selection app, which is itself very affordable because software is now so affordable. So this is not, and thank you very much for the question, because we should have been clear on this from the get-go. When we're talking about staging these properties and enriching them, this is all virtual. There's no physical activity at all. You're not hiring someone to build infrastructure on the site. This is all using technology to show electronically in a meeting like this, whether online or in person, a use case for the property. Michael, again,
Hi.
or Kathy, do you want to add
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah, I'll
I
add
got
to
that. I
that.
just was wondering if staff could do this in-house in most
Oh,
places.
sure. Yeah. No, the examples we'll show you today, most of them clients have done. And these are not people with any particular GIS training. It's all very straightforward now.
Yeah. And one thing I will add, and I think that was a good question, and your response, Ron, led me to think something else. So everything we're sharing with you, there is nothing that you as an economic developer need to create or have someone create on your behalf. Okay. This is existing data, like the infrastructure in terms of the layers. That's existing data. You don't have to have someone create that. So just want to be very clear about that. Okay, Ron.
I also think it's important to mention, and this is Kathy Becker, that if you have 3D building drawings, your technology should be able to incorporate them and show them online on your Sites and Buildings app. So that's something that Guru can do if you've got drawings from an architect or something of a building already, spec building perhaps. Integrating that into your app is a best practice that we've seen as well.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for the reminder, Kathy. We have a client, for example, this is pretty neat. They've got a 1,600-acre mega site, and they have an engineering firm they've worked with on a master plan for the site, and that master plan includes 16 buildings. And so the engineering firm had 3D renderings of this master plan, including the 16 buildings. Your technology should be able to take that electronically and integrate it and showcase that use case. Okay, so this was our first example. Let's move on to our second. And I'm going to come to a client site. This is the Economic Development Partnership of Alabama. And we see that first property on the list, Florence Lauderdale Industrial Park. We're going to do what we've mentioned several times today that businesses or site selectors will do when they want to learn more. We're going to go ahead and click on that property. So as I click on it, again, you'll see the listing panel show the details on the left. You'll see the software turn on a satellite image, turn on 3D, and showcase a whole bunch of data. Now, in this example, the client has really included a wealth of information relevant for the use case. So we can see this industrial park. The client has made it clear where the detention areas are, what the available land is, showcased a virtual building, and included some additional information about surrounding industry. So just to the bottom of the screen, you can see there's gift kitchens, blockchain tech, Shoals provision. So the client has put together a lot of really useful information for businesses that might be considering this industrial park, done so in a manner that's obvious, one-click access, and also pretty pleasing to the eye. So visually pretty interesting. Now this kind of display, again, pretty straightforward to do. And in this case, the client is emphasizing the whole business park. Okay, let's move on to our third example. This is an example in Bradenton, Florida, Manatee County. I'm going to come down to take a look at some of the properties as any site selector would. I see a couple of obvious examples I might want to look at: SRQ Airport Aerospace Park, Skyway Industrial Park. I'm going to go ahead and click on Skyway Industrial Park. Again, one-click access. And I see this particular property open up on the screen in 3D. Now, in this case, it's an industrial park, but the client has added multiple 3D buildings. So technology now enables you to include not just a single building, but multiple buildings. And you can add them directly in the app, as this client has done. You're not limited to importing them from architects or engineers working on a master plan for a site. So that example I mentioned of the client with the 1,200-acre mega site, that's one way of getting multiple properties in here. I'm sorry, multiple 3D virtual buildings in technology, but you should be able to simply add them yourself as well. So in this case, we can see a light industrial 250,000 square foot building, as well as a couple of additional buildings, all focused on this property. You can see the the property outlined in red as well. Okay, let's go to another example. This is our very specific example I mentioned earlier of a. In fact, let me go to the original listing site here and click on the property as we've done so far. So this is the Shoals Economic Development Organization in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. They've got some focused development they're targeting around an airport. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Florence Lauderdale Industrial Park. Oh, you know what? I clicked on the wrong one. Apologies. I'm going to hit the back button. Sorry. I just realized I clicked on the wrong property. I'm going to go to the Shoals Research Air Park. You recall I mentioned that I wanted to show you a very specific example, which is airside development at an airport. So I clicked on the wrong property. Apologies. I'm going to click on the Shoals Research Air Park. And again, the software will show the details of the property to the left. Turn on 3D, turn on a satellite image, load 3D virtual building, and additional information on the screen. So let's take a look at what the clients included here. It's a very detailed view for this very specific development opportunity. So we look at the property, we see a couple of interesting things. First, the client has used color schemes to indicate which land is available for development and which is not. Second, the client has included local industry in this airport industrial park. He's also shown a 500,000 gallon water tank, shown some infrastructure like the airport access gate, taxiway to the main part of the airport, showing relative locations of important access ways, Riley Drive, Peachtree Street, etc. So a really interesting view that summarizes all of the information a business might want to know about this site very, very obviously and very easily. And here's the property. Now, in this case, the client has added a 3D building on their own. It's actually not one of the 3D buildings we provide. This client was able to go get one on their own if they wanted to add. Very easy to do. Okay, so let's come back to our last example. And this is our retail example. So here I am. I'm going to now filter the properties for retail. So imagine I'm a site selector focused on a retail business. I don't want to look at commercial industrial properties. I'm just going to come to the property filters. I'm going to select retail, and the software immediately filters those properties and lists only those properties identified as retail. I'm scrolling through the properties. I see Northeast Restaurant Outparcel. That could be interesting because I'm interested potentially in putting my retail site on an outparcel of a larger property. I'll go ahead and click on that property. And again, the listing panel clears and I get the details on the left. On the right side of the screen, the software is going to show me another 3D example. In this case, it's a 3D building highlighting a retail use case for an outparcel at a large shopping center. So we can see that this example sits in the parking lot, as most outparcels do. In this case, the outparcel is paved. In many cases, as you know, it's not. In this case, it is. And we can see that that retail property, retail 3D building highlights a particular type of use case, in this case, a restaurant. So lots of opportunity to apply this logic, not just to traditional industrial sites, but also to commercial, retail, and others. Okay, I'm going to pause the screen again. Go back to the PowerPoint slides. Give me 1 second to get that set up. Okay, so you should see PowerPoint slide we left off on.
Yes.
I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. Okay, so that's the bulk of the discussion today. We want to get across to you what we're seeing as best practices, what we're seeing from leading economic developers and from working with site selectors. And we'd love to have a discussion. It's a pretty small group in the webinar today, so it's perfect. Really love to have a discussion, talk about whatever topics are important to you, whatever questions you might have on this.
Ron, I have a question for you that we typically see is economic developer will often say, well, my property data is synced from a third-party provider. Am I able to property enrich despite that it's coming from a third party, gets updated on a weekly, daily basis?
Yeah, great question. So we do get this question a lot, Michael. Thank you for reminding me. And the concern, just to be clear with everyone, if you're licensing property data, Maybe you've got too many properties for you to manage it yourself. Maybe you don't have time, whatever the reason, you're licensing property data. That is synced into your site selection technology electronically. And as Michael said, it's typically done once a week. If you stage a property in your app, will that staging get overwritten next week when the new sync comes in and replaces all the current data that you just updated? The answer is no. With modern technology, you can update your property in your app, your site selection app, to include 3D virtual buildings and a full staging of the property, full enrichment of the property, as we've discussed today. And it will not get overwritten when that data is synced again the next week. How does that happen? Well, these features you're adding to the property data set for that property are unique. They're not included in the data coming in the sync, and the software now recognizes they have unique codes. It's recognizing that it's unique, that data is unique, and it preserves it and doesn't overwrite.
You know, something else we hear about are the layers. There was some pretty interesting layers in there, Ron. What are the sources? Typically, that's a question we receive. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure. So most of the layers that our clients and that others we're seeing in the market are using to enrich their properties are infrastructure, demographics, workforce. This is the type of data that site selection technologies already have. So in other words, you don't need to go track down your power lines and high pressure gas lines and highways and things like that. That's already in GIS technology. On the other hand, though, if you do have local data that is relevant for a property that is not in your site selection app, maybe because it's so local and so specific, your technology should allow you to integrate that data, add it to the app, and assign it to the property to open automatically. What might be a good example? Well, imagine that you've got a site that's really good for manufacturing. You're really excited about it. And you've got a manufacturing cluster in the area. You want to make sure that cluster, because you think it's relevant, is visible to a site selector when he or she clicks on the property. No problem. You can take that industry cluster, you can create a layer out of it. It's very easy to do. Your site selection provider should work with you if you're uncomfortable or don't want to produce a layer. Your site selection provider should work with you to do that. Then you assign the layer to open automatically as you would any other set of data you want to include in that property enrichment. So you can include local data, but you're not required to. Of course, all the traditional stuff is included in the app in current technology.
Another question for you, Ron, is, different economic developers have different quantities of properties available. Some could have 5 and some could have 5,000. How does an economic developer determine how many properties they should enrich? I mean, enriching 5,000 might seem like a lot, and they could, but what is your recommendation for best practice?
Yeah, great question. Again, you're not going to enrich 5,000 properties, I can assure you, because enrichment requires you to open the property, select a few things to open automatically. It's not difficult to do or time consuming. It takes, in fact, just a minute or two, but you're not going to do it for 5,000 properties. It's just too much work. What we recommend, and the reason I'm going to share screens again, is that we believe you should really keep this focused on your major properties. So let me show you an example. I'm going to come back to this site. I'll hit the back button to go to our starting point. Your major properties are the ones that are the most valuable. What does that mean? Well, it's the ones that are going to have the biggest impact toward your strategic goals: job creation, tax base creation, economic growth locally, using your specific sites you're targeted on. Whatever those criteria are that fit your strategy, your major properties are the ones that are going to move the needle the most on those criteria. So you want to make those properties stand out, and those are the properties you want to stage. Now, we touched early in the discussion on making those properties stand out. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about how you're going to do that. Well, there are ways to do that, of course, with your general marketing, but your technology should support that. So you'll notice, for example, in the listing panel, I see the first property has a featured stamp on it. Second one has a featured stamp on it. Third one says grad site. Fourth one says featured. Fifth one says site ready. You can use technology to make it perfectly obvious to the businesses who come to your website which properties are your most valuable. And a stamp like that is configurable, that you can type to say whatever you want it to say, is one of the best ways to do it. So with that stamp, a property will default to the top of the list. And you can label it featured, as you see with the first two properties. You can label it a certified site program name, as you see with the third property. You can even label it with a target industry. It can say manufacturing. It can say distribution. You should be able to make that property stand out in your technology and make it clear that that's a major property you're focused on. And those are the properties we recommend that you take the time and effort to enrich.
We've had a couple inquiries lately that ask for not only a building, but renewable energy component as part of the site. So do you have any opinion on whether you should try to make a picture that incorporates that kind of element or not?
It's a great question, Carl. This is more and more common. And full disclosure, I spent 25 years in energy before co-founding GIS WebTech with Michael. And what we're seeing now, and you're seeing this, is businesses are now wanting to have assurance that they can source renewable power when they consider locations. Very different than 20 years ago. And sourcing renewable power is a complex task. And the reason is because how you source power varies state by state based on state regulation. In some states, you source renewable power one way. In other states, you source it other ways. It's a complicated task. What you should be able to do without a lot of effort is include in your app power generating stations as one of the features you want to show. So for example, if I come to the layers menu in this technology, I can look under infrastructure. Under utilities, I see electric transmission lines and natural gas interstate pipelines. Well, you can also include and should include in your case where you've got businesses very interested in this, generating facilities, and make it clear what renewable generating facilities are nearby. Now, the details of how to source renewable power in your community are going to be specific to your utility and specific to the site, and you're never going to be able to get all that summarized cleanly in a single view in the app. But you can provide some basic information, and you can also, when you stage that property, include in the information that is in the listing panel the fact that renewable power is available. You can make that clear. Long-winded answer. Sorry about that. I spent 25 years in the power industry. I can get on a roll. Sorry.
No, but it's come up a few times. They want to have a solar installation or something, some wind turbines, different things that have never recently been considered, but they're now, so now it's becoming something a lot of people are looking at.
Yeah, the important thing is
my answer was really focused on wanting to source, meaning buy renewable power. If you've got a business that wants to build a building and put solar on the roof, that's really an engineering question.
No, it's more they want land for a solar installation, like a cap.
Okay, so it's I see. So solar develop. It's a solar development project. That's what they want. They don't want to.
And no, it's a manufacturing facility, but they want their own renewable power.
Okay.
So they want a site that can accommodate both.
Yeah. So what makes a site good for solar? There's actually a standard set of criteria that you can use to help figure out which properties in your portfolio of properties might be good for solar. It's a long discussion. I'm happy to chat about it offline, Carl. Please feel free to reach out. I'd love to have a further discussion on it. But solar is actually a little bit easier to find properties for than wind or other resources.
Ron, if you don't mind, I'd love to jump in and share an example of, you talked about power plants in the US, but how that could look within within a technology. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen.
Thank you, Kathy. Perfect.
Yeah, and you can see this well, not yet, you can't, but now you should be able to see this installation actually showing power plants in the US. And these are solar plants over here. This is a client in Roanoke, Virginia, but you can click on the plants to learn more about what existing power plants are available, and everything from solar to natural gas, hydroelectric, and wind. But this kind of data can be included in your technology and can be added, as Ron mentioned earlier, as a layer to show, proximity of these existing facilities to your properties that may or may not be useful for, power generation themselves. Just wanted to show that example.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we've got a few minutes left. Any last questions? Again, we'd love to have any discussion you want to have. And let me pull up the PowerPoint one more time, just so I can show you our contact information. We would love to continue the discussion with any of you that want to, talk about some of this in more detail. Give me 1 second. In fact, I should turn that on to. There we are. So please feel free to reach out to me, Courtney, Michael. Kathy joined us as well. Her email, you can follow along with the convention there, is Kathy@GISWebTech.com, along with Ron, Courtney, and Michael at GISWebTech.com. That's Kathy with a C. So feel free to reach out to any of us. We'd love to continue the discussion. If you have any questions on any of this, that's what we're here for. Happy to help.
Yeah, great discussion, team. Thank you so much for leading this. A lot of weeds that you dove into, so fascinating. But yeah, please, before we go, take a picture of this slide here, and yeah, please reach out to the team at any time. You will also see Ron, probably Michael, hopefully the rest of the team at our site selection summit on April 30th and May 1st in Atlanta. So that'll be one of the best opportunities for us to all come together and talk about go forward strategy and leveraging momentum that we have. So we will see you then. Also, this session is recorded, so it'll be available on our website after this. Feel free to share with your colleagues or with your network locally as much as you would like. And also please follow us on SEDC.org to see the rest of the upcoming webinars that we have. We have a bunch of really good sessions planned for you, just like this one. So thank you so much, Ron, Michael, Kathy, for all that you do. Thank you all, audience, for being here as well. If there are no further questions, we'll look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.